we were just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get gas masks that are under our seat.
Now at the ongoing riot in Washington, as you just heard, members of Congress were told to put on gas masks after tear gas was fired inside the U.S. Capitol, apparently by the rioters.
CBS 4's Jim DeFede, the host of Facing South Florida, is joining us now. And Jim, what a sad day for American democracy. We've seen this around the world. I've seen it in Latin America, many countries. I never thought I would see it in the United States of America. I want to ask you about, first of all, the breaking news that Twitter has suspended Donald Trump's account. Is that going to make a difference, do you think, as far as him getting his message out to his supporters?
I think it's a first step, and I think it's probably the first step in what you'll eventually see as Twitter entirely banning Donald Trump. I think that once Donald Trump leaves office, he will lose his Twitter privileges, and that's it. I mean, Twitter has put up with him in large part because as an elected official, as the President of the United States, they felt that there was a duty to continue to have his views expressed on Twitter, but I don't think that's going to last for very much longer.
All right, Jim, and the president entered his presidency with a very dark speech on American carnage. So what's your reaction to seeing where we are 4 years later?
I think we have created I think he has created the very carnage that he once railed against and said he was going to oppose. I think this is one of the saddest, most disgraceful days in United States history. It will forever stain the name of Donald Trump. You know, this was an assault on our democracy that the president incited. Make no mistake about that. You know, as Elliot was just saying a second ago, when you incite a mob to go into the the legislative offices, intimidate, threaten people, use gas against law enforcement to try to intimidate people into overturning the results of an election, there is no other way to say it but that was an attempted coup. And that's what exactly took place here. And Donald Trump bears responsibility for it. Donald Trump is not alone in that regard. There are a number of other people around him who have continued to incite it. It was Rudy Giuliani who was talking just a few hours earlier, you know, talking about, you know, trial by combat. You know, Don Jr. has been revving up the assault on decency as well, talking about these terms in terms of that this is a fight for democracy in which we have to prevail and the patriots will rise up. Well, you asked for the patriots to rise up, the quote-unquote patriots. They rose up, and instead they assaulted the very democracy you pretend to care so much about.
Jim, let's bring up some rather remarkable images that we have of the boxes containing the Electoral College ballots. Let's see if we can get that video. Now, these were rescued from the Senate floor. How does Congress go back to business as usual, completing their constitutionally mandated responsibility?
They simply just will do it. I mean, both chambers, the Senate and the House, will go in starting around 8 o'clock tonight, and they will stay through the night, you know, to get this done, because they will not allow a mob, even a presidential-inspired mob, to exceed. The United States has to see this through, because that's what democracy is about. Democracies always teeter on a very fine edge, on a razor's edge, and they can fall off very easily. You know, you have now seen what has occurred when, after 4 years of tolerating a president who lies on a regular basis, who places his own needs above those of the country, and for the last 2 months, you've seen Republicans allowing the president to spread misinformation about an election, revving up people. In some ways, I don't blame those supporters of the president who rose up, because they have been lied to, they have been misled, they have been fed bogus information, not just by the president, but by a wide array of his supporters, by members of Congress, by senators, by more than 100 members in the House, 13 members of the Senate. And then there was another group of senators, and we could talk about it, Rick Scott, Marco Rubio. They have not stood up. They have not said anything about that the election was fair. Marco Rubio was supposed to come out with a statement at some point today. Apparently he will. He should have come out with a statement 2 months ago.
Jim, I think it's fair to say the world is certainly watching today. I don't think that is hyperbole in this case. How do you believe that this is being perceived overseas, not just by our allies, but by those who wish us harm?
I think our allies are horrified by this because American democracy is a beacon that is often used as a shining light for the rest of the world. It's something that other nations often aspire to. Who would want to aspire to what they saw in the streets of Washington today? I'll share with you, I just saw reported that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, Turkey, a somewhat repressive regime in and of itself, issued a warning to their citizens in the United States to avoid the D.C. area and to keep a low profile. That's the type of message that the United States would often send to its citizens in a foreign country when that country is going through political turmoil. Now, for our enemies, this is manna from heaven. Donald Trump has done more to undermine the way the United States is viewed than any other president I can imagine. I mean, you'd think that, Vladimir Putin or Xi in China, whoever you view as America's great enemies, they could not have in any way done as much harm to the United States as what we've seen Donald Trump do over the last 4 years, but particularly the last 2 months and today in particular.
And now we're all wondering how we're going to survive the next 2 weeks. Jim DeFede, thank you very much for joining us with your insight.